From Journey with VRD, you're listening to the Visions, Missions, and Manifestations podcast, the number one place for spirituality, healing, and transcendence. I'm your host, Vivian Raquel Dayan. Now let's get into it. On today's episode, we're diving deep into the fifth dimension, quantum field, and spiritual plane with none other than Maureen St. Germain. She's a six-time published author, award-winning meditationist, and founder of the Mystery School. She even has her own app where you can experience her meditations. Please welcome Maureen St. Germain. Welcome. Welcome to the Visions, Missions, and Manifestations podcast. I just finished reading your book, Waking Up in the 5D, which I have here now. And I found this book at Barnes and Noble. I went on a whim and I was so drawn to this book. There's so many great insights. When I read it, it felt like, of course, I'd pick up this book because it was a journey that I was going through at the time. And so I also felt like I was so happy that there was a resource such as yourself out there for people that are experiencing more and more of the 5D. Why don't you share with us a little bit of your journey about how you started for the listener who hasn't yet got to know you?
Okay. So I was born awake, but I grew up in a pretty normal family, raised Catholic. But my mother was very connected and was psychic. And so discussion of paranormal stuff wasn't taboo at all. And my mother told me about Edgar Cayce, and I read books about him. There is a River, probably while I was still a teenager. And I joined an Edgar Cayce study group in my 20s and, studied everything I get my hands on after that. So I've been a student of the esoteric all of my life. I did live a pretty normal life, in addition to having study groups that I worked with. Initially, I was the member of the study group, and then I became a leader of a study group. And I think it was in 1995, I began teaching publicly. I'd been teaching, in private groups, but now I'm teaching publicly. I'm teaching the Merkaba and also how to take your manifestation work to the next level using sacred geometry. And as I developed the Merkaba teaching, then I also began to understand the fifth dimension and what was coming next. And along the way, I began channeling many ascended masters, including beings that some people have never heard of, including me, called the Lords of Time, and other beings that are very highly evolved. So I traveled and taught all over the world, and I was in, I don't know, I think 24 different countries, personally invited. I only asked one person to host me. After that, everybody was reaching out for me, which is quite cool. And the story of my very first hosting was very powerful because I was still working in my corporate job. I still had 4 kids at home, and I asked if I was to do this, and I was told yes. And I called my friend in North Carolina, and she said to me, Maureen, I love you, but I'm in the Bible Belt. I'm not so sure your class is going to even take off. And I said, well, if you host it, people will come. And, I was so optimistic and so positive and so upbeat. And 3 weeks before the class, I only had maybe 3 or 4 people signed up. And that really wouldn't have even covered my airfare. So I went back to the altar and asked, are you guys sure you want me to do this? Yes, you need to buy that ticket. So I bought the ticket. And before the class began, there were 9 people signed up. I think an additional 3 signed up, at the very last minute. In addition, my friend said to me at one point, I have a tiny house. I have 3 little kids. I have a dog. I don't know where you're going to teach this class. Are you sure you want me to host it? And I said, yeah, we'll find a way to make it work. And the night before the class was to begin, or 2 nights before the class to begin, her best friend's mother, a realtor, called her and said, I heard that you're trying to host a class in your home, and I've got a 9-bedroom house on the beach that didn't rent this weekend. I'd like to gift it to you.
Wow. Wow.
Everybody stayed at the house.
So there's so much that I want to get into with this. I want to get into what your gifts are. I want to get into growing up, especially in the age that you did, in the era that you did. How do you integrate your gifts in your everyday life without feeling the judgment of like peers and friends and, different adults in your life?
Well, farm kids grow up with a sense of self. So you talk to anybody who grew up on a real farm. No, we're not talking a hobby farm. We're not talking go to grandpa's house for the summer. I'm talking about you grew up on a farm. You were expected to work. And we worked at 7 a.m. in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. We worked half a day on Saturday and half a day on Sunday. So, I'm talking heavy duty responsibility from the time you're a little kid. So what happens is you have a sense of worth. Your work is important. So you don't worry about what other people think. I mean, I still care about what other people think, but there's this, I'll say, resilience, and my father was very nurturing, and he would say to me, now don't tell everybody all the stuff you're getting, so he would give me the little, cautionary stuff. And so I had a lot of support on what to do and how to do it. Initially, I didn't know I was using my gifts. So I would say things and people would be, wow, that's pretty cool. Or that's interesting. So, that kind of thing would happen. And then as I developed more awareness and more connection with my gifts, then I noticed that the students who were studying with me would want to hang out with me because they were hanging on every word because they knew they'd learned more stuff. So it was kind of funny that way. The gift I have is the ability to bring in high level knowledge and make it applicable to everyday people.
Also want to add, plus you're a highly intuitive. You definitely not only pick up information for people to learn, but I feel like just listening to you on other podcasts, reading your work and speaking with you, I can tell how open you are to receiving messages from the people and also the things that radiate frequency to you. And you are really open to that energy.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, I just came from the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles, and we would give mini readings at the booth. And people would say to me afterwards, that is so amazing. How could you know that? You're so amazing, like that. So what I want to say about all of that is I have a devotion to help others level up. So I tell people, you can do what I do. If you will do what I did, you can get what I got. Not everyone's willing to meditate every day, but if you are, then you can achieve these things. And the cool thing is, I was given a lot of trials, so that a lot of the guided meditations are to help you through something specific, like sell your home faster, prayer before surgery. There's 2 different guided meditations to the archangels and what they do and how that works. One of them is very biblical and uses all the right biblical references so people can tell their family members, listen to this. And it's legitimate, And then there's other kinds of meditation that are way ahead of the curve, way ahead of the curve. I was telling people back in 1995, no, not 995. Yeah, maybe it was 95, that there was no more karma. And I was the only
I
one out
loved
there.
when I read that.
I was the only one out there saying that. And I remember getting the information and vetting it in my own way, and then telling some students of mine who were brilliant women, professionals in New York City, devout Buddhists. And, we were having dinner one night and they said, how can that be? It did not sit well with them. And I remember saying to them, I don't know. I just know that it's so. Now I understand that we are moving from the 3D game to the 5D game. And if we're changing games, the rules change. Everything changes. And that, I think, is the biggest aha for people. And that statement from Sana Kumara is so, so profound. The game is over. The game is ended when there are no more players. Will you be the first to
Okay.
leave or
Right.
last?
I have so much to unravel here. That definitely reminds me of the whole Matrix type thing of us being in the Matrix and now it's over. So many of us are waking up. When I read in your book, Waking Up in the 5D, you were the first person that really hit home for me when you said there's no more karma.
I
But
spent
we're
7 years writing that book.
I didn't know that you had the app at the time. So I was actually listening to your meditations on YouTube. I had the commercials on and all that, which was a little annoying. But I it took me into like a mini awakening. I went through a huge awakening in 2020 where I think so many people had a fresh awakening in that time period. But then I've been experiencing these like mini little up level, upgraded awakenings, so to speak. And when I did your meditation, okay, I was like, holy moly, this is so powerful, so powerful. And I'm so curious to hear about how you were able to not only download, because I think we're constantly being hit by intuition all the time, but how are you able to hear and fully understand that we were moving from 3D to 5D? And how do you like picture it? Because it sounds like you're a little bit of a seer. You were able to picture like we're moving out of the game, we're coming back to authenticity.
I just knew. And so it wasn't a matter of discovery as much as it was finding ways to express it to people and to help them understand. Um, because of my interest in the Merkaba and my development of that work, and think about this, most years I was on the road in a different city every single weekend except Mother's Day weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, and Christmas weekend. So I could be in 40 or 45 cities with 3 workshops every single weekend. So I had an intense commitment to be teaching. And it was at a time when I could do it. Um, I could be away from my home. And so I think that gave me the level up. And then I was given a permanent guide who has been with me probably since maybe 2007 or 8, something like that. And that guide is, I believe, Saint Germain. And so he's been with me all my life since then, since all my life since 2007. And that has also added to my abilities to know what I know. And, it's funny, but I was nicknamed the practical mystic right from the beginning. And, it's really important for people to understand. And this is something that came through at the Conscious Life Expo when I was on the panel. And they were asking, what changes, what advice, or, what do you see? And I said, when my kids were little and one of the boys had a bad case of diarrhea, my doctor told me to go to the drugstore and get capsules of acidophilus and put it on their food, And I said, well, what's that going to do? And he said, it'll change the population of good bacteria and bad bacteria. So the bad bacteria that's causing his stomach upset will be outnumbered. And then I said to everyone in the audience, there are more of us than there are of people who aren't ready to shift. And so you must know and understand that we can pull this off, and we're gonna.
Yes. Oh, wow. I love that.
So we
Because a few months ago, I think it's about 6 months ago, I was moving apartments. And I always feel like whenever you move apartments, you change or move homes, you change complete energy and different direction that you're going in life. And right before the move, I was sharing with a friend how, so many people seem to be so connected, so woke these days, in terms of 5D and quantum field and all of that. A few days later, I was introduced to somebody who really, really was resistant. And it was kind of like this reminder that although so many more people, and I think even as the generations move up, there's so many people that are just really waking up. But there are still people who are resistant to this kind of stuff. And it's just interesting to see, it's going to be interesting to see what triggers the wake up, because I'm a big believer what wakes people up is like illness, trauma, or like a really, really heightened curiosity. But
Mhm.
usually it's a trauma or an illness.
Mhm.
What,
That's
what do you
very
think
well
about
said.
that?
Very well said. And I agree with you that the people that I have seen that have stepped up are either traumatized, as you have defined, or they're very curious. And even though they believe one thing, they're willing to explore something else. And
Mhm.
when they get that aha moment, it's huge, just huge. So it changes the game. And the thing that is very challenging for people to understand is because the game has changed and because we're no longer playing the 3D game, even though we're still using those templates, we're still using those old clothes, we're still using those old ways of talking or being, we don't realize that we could have it so much better if we would just let go of that and open to a new way. And for example, a lot of people say the right way or the wrong way. I'm on the right path. I'm on the wrong path. I made a bad decision. And all the time I'm saying, it's okay. There's no problem here. We are doing the best we can. And in the 5D book, there's a list of words that kind of trigger you. And the biggest one that people use that are transitioning from 3D to 5D is I have to.
Mm.
If our audience, if you as a listener could choose to say to yourself, okay, I am going to stop using that phrase, I have to. You don't have to anything. And when you say it, you're actually giving away your power to whoever and whenever it can be taken from you. And who knows what that is or who that is. So instead of saying, I have to pick up the kids at 3 o'clock, you say, I like to pick up the kids at 3 because then I don't pay overtime. I get to meet my sweetheart for lunch or dinner. I need to do this report for my boss and I promised it'd be in tomorrow, so I better go. There's lots of ways to say what you have committed to doing and abandon the have to.
And I remember reading that, paying extra attention, like my ears heightened to when people around me would say, I have to. And I'd be like, well, actually, and I'd go into the whole spiel of what you wrote. Something that really interested me, I'm pivoting for a minute, is when you were a child, I heard you on a podcast say recently that you felt like you were being watched. And that kind of gave you the message that you were important, you were going to share things with the world that they needed to hear at this time. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I didn't assume that. All I knew
Mm.
was that I was being watched. And I was being watched by both benevolent and non-benevolent. And that made me aware in a way that perhaps another child might not be aware. When I worked as a lobbyist, when I was in the corporate world, it was not a problem for me to not spill the beans on something. And, I can remember one time I was at a cocktail party with my boss that we were sponsoring and he spilled the beans somehow. And I looked at him and I thought, what are you doing? And then he turned to me and said, isn't that right, Maureen? And I didn't say a word. I just smiled. And everybody cracked up because they knew he had committed a faux pas and I wasn't going to call him out. I was just going to support him and not say. So the idea of being self-important didn't occur to me, to be fair. I just knew that I was being watched. When you're a child, the things that happen to you, you don't realize don't happen to anybody else until you're adult and you start comparing notes. When I was, I was very precocious. Remember you said, how did I use my gifts? Well, when I was in kindergarten, the kindergarten teacher called me up to her desk and she said, what's your phone number? And I looked at her, I said, I don't know. And she said, what's your address? And I looked at her and I said, why are you asking me these questions when clearly you have it on a piece of paper in front of you? I got a note sent home from my mom.
There's a few things in your story that really resonate with me personally because was blind for the first 5 years of my life. And
Wow.
uh, yeah, yeah, yes. And I remember also feeling like I was being watched, but by myself. If you asked me who was watching me, I would have said myself. But like an older version of
Right. A
myself.
mature version of you.
And right. And how I remember later on, like remembering memories in color, and I would remember while the person behind me was watching me, but it was me. The thing is my mother, she asked the doctor, she said, she's been skiing, she doesn't bump into anything. How is it that she can't see? And the doctor's explanation was that, when you're really, the closer you are to the ground, the more you can feel around you. But I really think that it was myself seeing myself, if that makes any sense. I had an inner vision
Absolutely.
that,
Because there's more than one
y-
version of you, and there's probably a version of you, your higher self, for example, that was close by making sure that you were okay. And you probably had an entourage of angels and helpers to keep you safe. How did you get your sight back? That's amazing.
thank you. It's still not 2020. Don't be fooled. I'm wearing contacts. Even with my contacts, my glasses, no 2020. But what they did is they did a surgery to prevent more cells from dying.
But you
What
have
was so
inner
interesting,
sight, so who cares?
who cares, right? Who cares? But I do think that a lot of my intuition and my gifts came from those 5 years of my life. But what was interesting about your work in regards to this is how you talk about your higher self, your highest self, EST, love that. But you also talk about guides. And so I was curious to know your take on the difference between your guides, your authentic self, and if you think that source, God, and the universe are all the same thing.
I do think source and God and universe are the same, but they're different subsets. So when we look at source, it could be all that is. When we look at the universe, are we talking about the known universe or the universe that exists that we don't know about? And God is a generic term that we all use to represent a supreme being. Now, from my vantage point, there are several layers of that. So there are angels and archangels. They are God's messengers. They have their mission is to bring God's love to humans because we forget once we leave source and we're out here on our own. Then we have guides. They're usually beings who have either had embodiments here on Earth or they've had life experiences on other planets or other planes of existence. And they are here as truly wisdom keepers. And they also help us hold space. So their abilities to support us is huge. And we look at the angels and we say they're the miracle makers because they represent God's love to us. And then finally, we can look at our higher self. And our higher self is you. It is the version of you that's fully connected to God. And the best way to explain it is to say, think about your laptop computer that has a little transformer between you and the cord in the wall. And the transformer steps down the power from the wall so that your computer doesn't burn up and still can have power. The transformer sometimes heats up, sometimes it doesn't. But the transformer is stepping down the energy. So when you work with your higher self, you learn things that your higher self can tell you if you ask. And your higher self has a place in your consciousness that allows you to acquire information, but it doesn't open up until you start asking. So the more you ask, the more that door stays open.
I love that. That's so well said.
And then there's a whole teaching that I created that if you follow the protocol and it only takes 45 days, you will have 100% accuracy. And that information is also on the app and it's on the free version. So you go into the wisdom section and the higher self protocol is right there. And there's three parts to it. And if you do the 45 days, you will have the accuracy that everybody wants, and it isn't about
Wow.
prediction, but it is about taking steps that put you in the right place, put you in the place that you need to be for the optimum experience. And that is truly amazing, truly amazing. I've had so many experiences. You could ask your higher self, do we go to this restaurant? No. Is it our highest and best good to go to this restaurant? No. Is it our highest best go to this restaurant? Yeah. We were just there last week. Really? Yes. Okay, fine. So you go. And maybe you run into someone that you need to talk to. Or it turns out that the other restaurants were closed. Any number of things. And I tell so many stories about how when I asked my higher self something, the benefit was phenomenal, just phenomenal.
And would you say that when you are connected to the 5D, your intuition and your connection with your higher self is even stronger?
For sure. Yeah. What happens is, well, let's back up. If there's no more karma, what does that mean? That means you stop keeping score on yourself and you stop keeping score on others. That's not so easy. Most of us are keeping score on the other guy or on ourselves. If somebody cuts in line in front of me, I'm keeping score. Hey, I was here first. You know what I mean? Or
Mhm.
I even asked one time a few years back about my connection, and I asked my guide, is there anything I'm doing that's preventing me from being as connected as I could be? And they said, yeah. And so I asked them what it was, and they said, well, when you're driving, you get a little upset when people cut in front of you. And it was, how could I deny that? It was right in my face. So I chose to start blessing the people and making up little stories about them. Well, they probably need to get where they're going way more faster than me, or maybe they didn't see me, or maybe they were in a hurry and they need to get to somebody's dying. You can come up with all kinds of funny stories and start to smile and not be upset, to choose to be okay that somebody else got in line ahead of you. And that's just one little example. But what if somebody doesn't pay you back? They promised they were going to pay you back and they don't. How long do you go along holding resentment or anger at them? It may be time to say, okay, maybe I didn't pay them back in another lifetime. I better let this one go, you know?
Yes, 100%. So when we think about like staying in that fifth dimensional plane, one thing that I learned from you that I do every single day is when I wake up, I say, may I experience a heaven on earth day, as well as everybody I come into contact with and everybody I'm in contract with. And
It's
it really
fabulous.
changed my day. Yeah, it really changed the tone of my entire day of, sometimes we have to see people that we know we just really don't share the same values, and that could be hard. And instead of me fighting that restriction all day and staying in a 3D realm for so long, I said, you know what? Today I'm going to experience a heaven on earth day, and so is the other person. So is everybody I'm in contract with. And what I found that does is it opens the doors to so many more opportunities. People who, let's say, were ill intentioned or had bad intentions for you, that goes away because you're automatically wishing them a heaven on earth day. And if you're experiencing heaven on earth, you don't have time. You don't have the mindset to be conniving and whatever. So that was a powerful, powerful message that you shared with everyone. I love that.
Thank you.
How'd you come up with that? Yeah.
This is a good story. I was getting off of a plane and I ran into it was just in the small town that I lived in. And remember, I'm traveling every week. So the person who checks me into the flight is also the person handling the baggage. Okay. So she looks at me and says, oh, hi, Maureen. And I looked at her and I said, oh, I'm having my day from, and I'll just leave that open. I'm not going to say that anymore. And she looked at me kind of funny. And I said, well, I have to be back here in an hour to catch the flight to go in another direction. And then I said, but I'm having a day of heaven on earth because I'm flying with United. And she smiled and I walked away. I came home and there was a flood in my basement. A pipe between the walls had leaked and had, kind of overflowed where the faucets came in. And there was like 2 inches of water on my basement floor. My housemate could hear water running, but she didn't explore what it was and she didn't bother to text me. It's so funny in hindsight, but I got my neighbor across the street and he came over and we called the plumber. The plumber came when he said he would. It was only $125 because he asked me where to drill. And I asked my higher self. He's thinking he needs to go in the upstairs bathroom. I'm thinking he needs to find the hole in the downstairs bathroom. So I asked my higher self and I was a little paranoid. So I told him I could see that it was here, but I said, well, maybe right here. And he could see where he needed to go and he didn't have to make any more holes. So that made it super easy. He was able to repair the pipe and my neighbor came over with fans and helped us dry out the space between the walls. And I had time. I had called the airline and said, look, I'm tied up with this household drama. Can I get on a later flight? And they said, yes. And then I called my host and she was not happy that I was coming in later. But then I went to the bank and made my deposit. And then this was back in the day when people were giving you checks, right? I got a phone call. I'm walking in the house, all just about ready to turn myself around for the next flight. And I get a phone call and it's from the airline, a real person. And she says, your flight to Chicago, your feeder flight to Chicago is late. In fact, both of our flights are an hour late. And if you stay on the flight you're booked on, you will miss your connection to the East Coast. Is there any way you can make the earlier flight? And I remembered thinking on my way home, I only needed another hour and I could have made that flight. And so when she said that, I said, I can be there. My suitcase is in the car. I'm ready to go. And I'm only 15 minutes away from the airport. So I'm sitting on the plane.
Wow.
And I'm asking my guides, how did this happen? How did this be so like the drama and grace and ease the whole way through? And they said, well, you asked for a day of heaven on earth. And I thought, whoa, the next time I have a chock-a-block day, I'm going to ask for a day of heaven on earth. The second time I asked for it, it occurred to me, I could ask every day and you can too.
Yes, I love that because I've been saying it every single day. And when something is out of place, I'll be like, ah, I forgot to say it. And I'll say it. And it's just,
Hey there, it's Vivian, and I'm briefly interrupting this podcast episode because I am so excited to share with you some of the new ways that we can work together. I've included new services to my site, and one of the cool ways to work with me now is in real life, in person. Hey, come into my energy. Let's manifest it in person. So that's really cool. That's a VIP day. That's where I curate the most perfect manifestation day for you. But that's not all. I also now offering a group manifestation immersion starting April 1st. It's going to be a 4-week manifestation immersion. It's called Hot Girl Spring because we're springing into summer, already manifesting the thing we would have wanted to have for summer. So like if you're wanting to book that Europe trip this summer with the girls, like let's manifest that raise now. Like let's do it. If you're wanting to manifest a boyfriend to bring to all the weddings, barbecues this summer, like let's do that too. That's going to be so much fun. Let's hop into summer with the things that we want, but like let's manifest it in spring together. And it's going to be full of party, happy, fun vibes as we celebrate each other's successes week after week. So if that sounds like something you want to do, head over to the website or DM me, like slide into my DMs, Journey with VRD, and let's see if this is a hell yes for you. Because it's really important for me that you feel like this is a no-brainer. Anyway, I love you guys. Let's get back to the episode because this is a juicy one.
it's such a good one. So I tell clients all the time that the quickest way to collapse time is to trust your highest self or your intuition. If you don't ask other people, just tune in and ask yourself, what is in my highest interest? What will work out in my best benefit? And I wonder if you agree on that, just hitting your highest self for info rather than just asking everybody, because then you start to doubt yourself, in my opinion, and you kind of lose that connection with the highest self.
Okay, so do this. Make a little note to yourself to ask me about what to do when you're around resistant people, because I would like to circle back to that, but I'm going to answer your question
Yes.
now. Um,
Yes.
so first of all, it is hard for people to trust their intuition, and so their ego gets in the way. So what I did was develop this wonderful protocol, and the protocol will give you the accuracy you seek. So you move from trusting your higher self to knowing your higher self. And I use my higher self for everything. Cooking, is it my highest best good to wash my hair today? And there's sometimes I think, I really need to wash my hair. Are you sure? Yes. Okay, I'm not going to do it. And then I needed that time for something else, So these things it's just amazing how this just falls into place. So for sure, I agree with you that asking your higher self about everything that is about your action steps is the most phenomenal and easiest way to stay in 5D. It's a remarkable tool that when we don't use it and we forget, we can often find ourselves making a decision that we thought was a good one, but wasn't. Now, one of the things I recommend when you learn this protocol, and now you're on your own, so you go through 6 weeks of practice period, and now you can ask any questions because it's very precise. I can take you through the parts, but I think the time is best utilized talking about it and telling people, just go to the app, everything's in there. What's interesting is when we ask, we need to ask a certain way. So we ask higher self, is it in my highest and best good to take this action step? We don't ask what I call the second last question. The second last question is so that you can make a decision. So for example, let's say you are wondering about the rain and you're wondering, gosh, do I need to take an umbrella? So you don't ask, is it going to keep raining? A lot of people would do that. Instead, you would ask, is it in my highest and best good to carry an umbrella today? And I can remember being told yes on a day that was, iffy. And I asked, okay, do I take the collapsible one or do I take the cane? And they said, take the cane version. And I carried it around all day and I never opened it, but I did trip and my cane caught me.
Oh my goodness. So you never know where an answer is going to lead you, but they always have your highest and best interest in mind.
Mhm. And the other thing
Wow.
I really like about your question is you use the word wonder. And I tell people there's really only one question to ask your higher self and to ask of the universe. And that is, I wonder what's going on or what's going on. That wonder question, that curiosity question is so powerful because all the other interview questions lead you to get a piece of information so you can take an action step. That's operating in your ego. That's a 3D operation. When did the kids eat the cookies? Who ate the cookies? Why are the cookies gone? And so you start to look at these questions and you realize that every one of them, well, if they ate them at 5:30, they're probably not going to eat their dinner. If we know that the neighbor kids were over, maybe they ate them and my kids did what they were supposed to do. So why are the cookies still here? Why didn't they eat any apples? Well, the apples tasted terrible. Or, there's lots of things that I need to get new apples. But if I say what's going on, I'll get the full story. And the thing about the what's going on, or I wonder about, is this whole idea that you become eligible to receive information that you would never have thought of.
I love that. I love that. That in itself is so powerful because, it sounds like every other question except for I wonder is limiting and we don't get the full picture. It's restricting. And so when we want to be open to more information, to say, I wonder, not only are we opening up to a full picture, but we're also being open to possibility that we might not have even thought of or come up with on our own. So that was really great.
Yeah. And so now let's circle back to the idea of the 3D, 4D, 5D. So one of the things that happened to me is my stuff was disappearing. I'd set down a crystal or car keys or my sunglasses, and I'd go back for them, and they weren't where I thought they were. And I would ask, where did my stuff go? And I would be told it's in a higher dimension. And initially I thought, I hope this makes you laugh, that my stuff was going ahead of me to 5D, like we send monkeys into space, okay? But I was wrong, because when I finally started teaching people, just ask what's going on. And then by default, I was so used to asking it when something happened and I said, what's going on? My guide said, Maureen, you were in the fifth dimension when you set it down. And that's
Oh
when I
my
began to
goodness.
understand that the dimensions are like the Russian dolls. And that when you're in third, you can see into second and first. But when you're in fifth, you can see all the way down. And if you're in fifth, when you set something down and then you slide back into three because you're anxious, you now can't find it, you can't see it because it's in 5D. One of my friends told me a great story where she had worn a beautiful emerald ring to a party. And when she came home, she threw it in a dresser drawer because she wanted to make sure she put it away somewhere. And the next morning when she went to put it away, she couldn't find it. And it was a family heirloom. So she fussed and fretted about it for about 6 weeks. Every time she opened that drawer, she went looking for it. Couldn't find it. Finally, she said to herself, okay, that's it. I give up. I'm letting go. I'm not going to be stuck in this materialistic game. It's gone. Whatever it is, I'm good with that. Next time she opened up the dresser drawer, it was right on top.
I actually experienced this when I was in high school, okay, a long time ago. This is a funny one. I was wearing mascara for the first time. I'll never forget. And I put it on and I put it into a drawer. 5 seconds later, I wanted to go pull it back out. It was not there. So I said, let me say a prayer. Let me say a prayer and maybe it'll show up. And I said the prayer and I opened the drawer. And what do you know? It's right there.
That's so cool. Good for
I didn't
you.
realize it. Yes, but I didn't realize it at the time. Not until now that you're speaking, it just clicked. I'm like, oh my goodness, you know
That's
what
what happened.
The prayer elevated me to the fifth dimension.
You
I
were
think
at
prayer
peace.
is such a good tool.
Mhm.
Yes. And then what did you know? It was right there. And I was like, wow. And now whenever I lose something or whenever I misplace something, I say the prayer and like that. It's, I could say firsthand, I really do believe that we're constantly moving through the third, the fourth, and the fifth dimension. And a few years ago, I began seeing different. It started with the ring around the light. I don't know if you've ever experienced the ring around the light. And then the auras. And it's been such a beautiful journey with all of that. And so I find that I'll know which dimension I'm in based off how vibrant people are to me and their aura around them and even the lights in the room. I became super light sensitive. It's been a fun journey. And speaking of all this, I have to ask, do you believe in galactic beings? Do you believe in what some people would describe as aliens?
I do.
Yes.
I'm very connected to the ETs, and I work with the ETs. I work with a council of 9 who are way above the ETs. So it's interesting because many times in Akashic record readings, because I do readings for people, they will ask, where am I from? What star system or whatever. And I remember a woman from Japan. I was in Japan, and she asked where she was from. And I don't know now what the answer was, whether it was Andromeda or the Pleiades or Sirius. But I said out loud, well, you're from, this place and you've come to be of service to humanity. And she said, that's exactly what I told my mother when I was 5.
Wow. I know that you do Akashic record work. One more thing on the galactic family and just, ETs and all of that. I recently came across this belief where angels are actually a form of galactic being that come through to us in in an angelic form, certain types of ETs, so that we can see them in a way that wouldn't scare us. What's your take on that?
I think that might be true, but it doesn't mean that all angels are ETs. It does mean that some ETs will take an angelic form, as you say, to not frighten. But there are for sure angelic beings. And I've known that from the time I was a child. And I don't know how I know. But I actually have had experiences. I was in France with my family, and we were put into a room that had a skylight on the top floor of this little hotel. And Archangel Michael came in and got me and escorted me to the church where they had a labyrinth. And we weren't planning on going in that particular church, that city. We were traveling all through France, you know. But I told everybody I'm not leaving until I get into this church. And then I said to the kids, you know, if you don't want to go in, it's okay with me. I need to do this. So we found the church because we didn't even know where the church was, and found the labyrinth and had this amazing experience. Then I went out to the car and I said, all right, you guys, you have to come in. And they said, I thought you said we wouldn't have to go. And I said, well, now that I see how amazing it is, you're going to want to see it.
Wait, that's so beautiful. I love that.
I know for certain that the angelic kingdom is real. And I certainly agree with the concept that ETs can show up in that form, but it doesn't mean that every angelic appearance is an ET.
Right. So I do want to talk about the Akashic Records, your work in it. And I know that you also have taught or still teaching manifestation workshops. I'm a manifestation coach, and I love to use different modalities to help people manifest in the quickest ways and most efficient, beneficial ways possible. So I'd love to hear your experience and how you use the Akashic Records to help people manifest.
Well, accessing the Akashic Records improves your intuition in every level. So even if you're using the Akashic Records to ask about why your brother, you know, hung up on you the other day, or, you know, what's going on at my job, or what's going on with this friend or whatever, that connection then improves your connection to source across the board. So that's the first thing. And it was because of that I figured out a very powerful concept in manifestation. And I wrote a book on it. It's called Be a Genie. And in the book, I explained something that's called the Phoenix Sequence. And the Phoenix Sequence is a name I gave to a sequence that exists. And I'm going to share it with you because it's very cool, especially since you're into the manifestation. And then, you know, we'll figure out a way to get you the book. Now, many people who are interested in sacred geometry have a awareness of what's called the Fibonacci sequence: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, like that. And as they listen to it, or as they know it, many of us learned it when we were kids, or in geometry class in freshman in high school. So the sequence is built upon itself. So 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 1 = 3, 3 + 2 = 5. So you're always looking from where you're at to the previous number and adding it to the present number, which gives you the future number. Okay. Now, with all the study I've done in sacred geometry, this you have to take my word for, I have concluded that phi, PHI, or 1.618 ... is source code for the universe. And that relationship exists in the physical body. So from your little finger to your wrist bone is in phi. If this is 1, this is 1.618. If this is 2, this is double 1.618, okay? And if you go bigger, from here to your elbow is in phi to your wrist. And there's lots of tools. I've done a lot of classes where I've shown people this. Now, here's the Phoenix sequence. You can start with any 2 numbers and add them.
Oh, wow.
In a logarithmic spiral like this. And on the 9th and 10th iteration, it will produce phi. Now, how do we use that? So, and what's really fun is, let's say you're teaching manifestation in a class and you tell people, okay, give me a random number, and they give you a number, and you give me a number. And then you add those 2 numbers together and you make it a string. So you know, let's say you start with 8 and 10. So the next number is 18. Then the next number is 28, you see, like that. And you go in a string.
Yeah.
And you count how many times you draw the line to show you're adding. Okay. On the 9th and 10th iteration, those 2 divided will produce 1.618. Now, why is that significant? Because it means that the way we create is the past plus the present equals the future. So when you're manifesting, you don't go to your outcome. You go to beyond your outcome and resonate with this and this, which will automatically produce the middle.
Yes, 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 yes. I always say when it comes to manifesting, call in the next thing as if you already manifested the thing that you're calling in. And this is exactly what you're saying, but
So
different.
if a person wants to be married, they don't visualize walking down the aisle. They visualize the celebration of an anniversary because that proves they got married. And you don't add a
Beautiful.
baby to that because then that's adding to the manifestation. Instead, you see yourself with a baby. Nowadays, people have babies and then get married. You know, sometimes that's how it goes. So go with a single manifestation. You can have many. And the book is called Be a Genie. It's available on Amazon, I believe. And it's also available on our website.
Yes. And do you want to share what your website is called for the listener who might be like, I need to buy this book right now?
Okay. Saint Germain Mystery School.com. And if you type in my name, it'll also bring you to my website, Maureen Saint Germain.
Perfect. All this work takes us back to the question you wanted to circle back to, which is how to get through to somebody who's resistant. And I know we can't bring the people that we love on the journey with us as much as we want to. I want to know, can you get through somebody who's resistant? How, and if so, how?
Okay. So the first thing you do is you look for what you have in common and you focus on that. And you don't let your differences stand in the way. And then that will ease the tension between you. And then what happens is you might drop a little bomb, like saying, well, when I was in the Akashic Records this morning, I was told blah, blah, blah. And then you change the subject. Where are we going to go for dinner? You don't get into it. Or you wait until they ask you a question, which is even better. And when they ask you a question, you don't get on your pulpit and start telling them all the cool stuff you know. Instead, you give them the vanilla answer. And the vanilla answer is very simplistic and easy for anyone to understand. So, for example, you're talking about 5D, and I read this cool book about 5D, blah, blah, blah. And someone says, well, what is 5D? You say, oh, it's the equivalent of what everyone else calls heaven. Where are we going for dinner? You immediately change the subject. You take the pressure off of them to ask more questions. You take the pressure off of you to give more information. So you give the tiniest answer you can that's accurate. And I call it the vanilla answer, the answer that tells them a tiny little bit, but not really anything substantive. And you wait. And what happens is they come back to you an hour later, a day later, 2 weeks later, and they start asking more questions. Now, when they ask the first time, their mind's open. As you started with the interview, it's all about curiosity. But when they ask the second and third question, they've opened their heart. And that's when they're ready to hear. So you don't even attempt to bring them along. Instead, you're happy with them just the way they are. And you're happy with you just the way you are. And you champion their right to hold this belief as long as, I had a guy that I dated years and years ago. And it was after my first marriage had ended. And he said to me, I have very strong feelings for you. And I wonder why that is. Now, this was not a man who was professing his love for me. He was obviously unhappy with himself that he cared so much for me. Okay. So I knew he wasn't professing his love. He was expressing his disappointment that he was in love with me. It's hilarious.
And what did you say? Yeah, this is amazing.
And I looked at him and I said, well, we worked together a few years back and we got to know each other. And he said, oh no, this is bigger than that. This is so strong. It's as strong as I felt about my wife when I proposed to her. So then I said, well, maybe we were together in another lifetime and we've just kind of opened up that connection. And he said, oh no, I'm a devout Catholic and I don't believe in reincarnation. And I said, I champion your right to hold that belief as long as it pleases you. And he leaned in and he said, well, does that mean that your grandma and my grandfather were together? And I said, well, something like that. I never saw him again.
We can encounter different parts of ourselves, different versions of ourselves on this earth. How to get more of our mission completed, there can be another person living with part of our soul to get more work done. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Mhm. Yes, I have met many people who have been other versions of me. I also have, with all the students I've taught all over the world, I've been able to identify people as being the same version of themselves. And because this is one of the things that I teach, I believe that people that are meant to connect are often put in my classroom. So, for example, I had a customer who had studied with me in Seattle and another customer who had studied with me in New York. And they both wanted to go on the Egypt trip with me, on an Egypt trip with me. And they were both born in Tokyo. One was tall and slender, like that kind of Japanese guy. And the other guy was short and smallish, and that kind of style of body that a Japanese person might have. And so I thought it would be lovely to put them together, but I knew the minute they both signed up that they were the same soul. Now, because they had studied with me on the trip, they came to me together and said, we figured out we are the same soul.
Wow. And
Yeah,
how
I
they
don't,
feel about that.
well, what's cool is usually, the meetings are a little bit like when Harry met Sally in that movie, in that old movie, if you've ever seen it. They have these encounters and then they bust apart and then they have another encounter and they go their separate ways. So, for example, at the show I was at, an author that I know, and he and I were chatting at my booth, and he said, and he mentioned this other man that I knew, and he said, we had our photograph taken and we were astounded at how much we looked like each other. And I said, yeah, and where does that take you? And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, I have this teaching that there's more than one version of a person and that we come into each other's life. Well, then he proceeds to tell me that he connected with this other man. These two men connected randomly throughout their life. And they've known each other for a long time, but they're
Wow.
together and then they're apart and then they're together and they're apart. And right now they've got a nice business deal going where they're working together again.
Wow. And I was going to ask, like, do you think when these souls or this one soul connects with this other version of self, that activations and upgrades are happening and messages are happening on a different level than what normally happens when two people connect?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That is true. And it's also more than a normal conversation, a normal communication. You're absolutely right. A version of you comes along to help another version of you.
Isn't that beautiful? Like, it's just so, to me, it's just, I don't have a word to describe it other than it's just so cool. It's so amazing. And these words sound so nothing compared to what I'm trying to portray of these
Perhaps
experiences.
synchronicity would work. So I have found that the connections are often found in similarities. For example, in my book, I talk about four men that are the same soul. They all had an engineering connection. One man wanted to be a doctor, but his father wouldn't pay for it and he didn't have the funds. So he became a farmer. But another man did become a doctor. And when I asked him what his engineering connection was, oh, that was my undergraduate degree. How many people have an undergraduate engineering degree and then become a doctor? A medical doctor, okay? They all had the same letter as their first name. Two of the men had the identical birth date, not the same year, but the same day of the month. And I find that people have these little tiny coincidences that match either in their name or in their birth date or some other way that you can identify them. And then there's others that don't seem to have any identification, but they know each other. For example, one of my students in Seattle was in a class with a well-known author by the name of Walter Simcoe. And Walter wrote a book called Return of the Revolutionaries. Walter's an MD. He was giving a lecture in Hong Kong, and an Indian man from India came up to him, and the two of them just kind of felt like they fell into each other. They knew each other, and they struck up a friendship. And my friend said to Dr. Simcoe, one of the people that I study with says that there's other versions of you. do you have any opinion about this? And Walter said, oh, yes. And he proceeded to tell the story about his Hong Kong encounter and how he was friends with this guy. And interestingly, they talked about their careers, and Walter had pursued maybe three things. You know, we all have many things that we're interested in. So he had maybe three things, and he'd set aside one of them to pursue very closely on the fact that the revolutionaries are back. And I'll tell you about that in a second. And this other piece that he had kind of left on the table, the other doctor from India, the medical doctor from India, picked it up. But he picked it up long before these two men ever met. So my little joke about all this is that you meet for coffee once a month with all the versions of yourself. And you say, well, you want to take the Hawaii gig? No. Well, maybe I'll look into it. Isn't that
I
awesome?
love that. Once a month, we meet for coffee with all the version of ourselves, and whether it's physically or in another realm. It's such a great image and idea to think about and kind of know that on a deeper level, if something comes through, just because this opportunity comes through, if you don't have the bandwidth or you don't have the capability to get it done, another version of you will pick it up for you. So
Isn't that
I
fabulous?
love that. Yes. Thank you for sharing that.
And the nice thing about this is you can use the meditation called Crystal Elohim. There's a track, I think it's track 13, where you reach across the sea of infinity and connect with the other versions of you.
Wow, I'm going to try that one tonight.
So people like George Washington, Martha Washington, and Thomas Jefferson, and all those people who were involved in the American Revolution are back in embodiment, and they're here holding space for the transformation of our government and our planet in a big way. And when people say, oh, you know, I'm worried there might be a third world war or any of that, there is no chance those beings would have come here if they knew there was any chance we would fail. They just wouldn't
I
risk
love
it.
that.
So
That's reassuring. Yes. And so I know that your Earth mission here, you personally, Maureen, is to help with the people that are waking up, to really be a leader in that department, which you so successfully are doing. What are you manifesting in the upcoming years? What's your next big vision for your work and what you do?
my next big vision is that we have created an online school. And the long range plan is there would also be a brick and mortar expression of that as well. We have a wonderful team that has come on board, and we are growing our organization, and I'm narrowing my focus. My next book is coming out in September. It's already been written. It's, you know, in the pipeline, as they say. And so that's coming along. Thank you. So as a matter of fact, I'll give you a closing thing that'll just I hope it trips your trigger. I figured out that there's certain movies that are helping people wake up. Okay. And here's my short list. The Other Guys, that's on Netflix right now. The Other Guys. And it's also very funny. And the more you know, the funnier it is, because there are a lot of innuendos. You know, it's like when I watched the movie about Michael. You remember that old movie about Archangel Michael and how he came to that little old lady's house? Did you ever see that movie?
No, I don't think so.
You must go see it. Anyway, there's so many things in this movie that are so funny. It stars John Travolta. Wonka is another wake-up movie. They cloned Tyrone. When you start to watch these movies, you can I'm going to sit here and say that about 85 to 95% of these movies are telling you the truth, as if they're just telling you a story. Okay?
I love that.
The Burial. This was another popular one on Netflix. And I thought it was about a bunch of old people, but it wasn't. It was a very heads-up movie. And the cool part of this movie, it was about this really clever Black attorney who had created a niche for winning cases. And he only worked in that category. And this older white man came to him and said, I need your help. And he refused to help him. And back and forth they go till they finally get this guy to say yes. And then it turns into a circus, but it's such a cool storyline. And it's all about how we've created this system, I'll call it of lockdown, that we're saying, wait a minute, maybe that was a bad idea, and then the final one is called the banker. Anyway, that's how it is.
I love that you shared that. Thank you
Mhm.
for coming on the episode and the podcast.
Hey, if you like this podcast episode, please download it, give us a nice review, and follow us on Instagram at Journey with VRD to get all the latest and the greatest updates. Till next week.